Trump is going to accept a visit from Keir Starmer. Keir's going to be trying to stick his tongue up Trump's anus, but Trump isn't going to be having any of that. Firstly, because Keir Starmer is about as relevant right now as Betamax, and secondly, because Trump knows where Keir Starmer has been, and that is all the way up Brokeback Mountain with Lord Ali. That's it. Batshit bonkers Britain.
The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And in that split second when Donald Trump locked eyes with the lens and said those words, everything changed for Keir Starmer forever. What happened next wasn't just political theater. It was a complete demolition that left Labour scrambling in panic mode and sent shockwaves racing across the Atlantic. This wasn't a gentle disagreement between allies. This was Trump at his most ruthless, tearing apart Britain's opposition leader piece by piece on live television, while millions watched in stunned silence. The fallout was instant. The damage was brutal. And for Starmer, there was nowhere to hide. It began like any other Tuesday evening press briefing. Trump stood behind the podium at Mar-a-Lago, fielding routine questions about trade deals and foreign policy. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual. Reporters shuffled through their notes, expecting the usual talking points about America first and economic prosperity. Nobody saw the political earthquake coming. Then, out of nowhere, a British journalist raised her hand and asked about recent statements from Keir Starmer regarding future UK-US relations. The question seemed innocent enough. Starmer had been making headlines about resetting diplomatic ties and taking a different approach to international partnerships. Standard opposition leader rhetoric, really. Nothing that should have triggered what happened next. But Trump's entire demeanor shifted in that instant. His relaxed posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed with laser focus. The casual smile vanished, replaced by something far more sinister. He leaned into the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "Keir Starmer," he said, drawing out each syllable like he was savoring the taste of what was about to come. "Let me tell you something about Keir Starmer." The pause that followed felt eternal. Cameras zoomed in, phones started recording, and then Trump unleashed hell. "This guy is the weakest leader I've ever seen in my entire life," Trump declared, his voice rising with each word. "Weak on crime, weak on borders, weak on everything that actually matters to real people. The British people deserve so much better than this disaster." The room erupted into chaos. Journalists frantically scribbled notes. Camera operators adjusted their angles to capture every expression, every gesture. But Trump wasn't finished, not even close. He was just getting warmed up for what would become one of the most brutal political takedowns ever broadcast live to a global audience. "You want to know what Starmer really is?" Trump continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "He's a puppet, a complete puppet for the European Union. He wants to drag Britain right back into the Brussels bureaucracy that the British people voted to escape from. He's trying to undo Brexit through the back door, making secret deals with EU officials while pretending to respect the will of the voters." The accusations came fast and furious, each one more damaging than the last. Trump's face grew redder with passion as he systematically dismantled Starmer's reputation with surgical precision. What made this moment so devastating wasn't just the content of Trump's attack. It was the sheer force of his delivery. This wasn't a prepared statement read from a teleprompter. This was raw, unfiltered fury being broadcast live to millions of viewers across 2 continents. Every word was chosen for maximum impact. Every pause was calculated to let the damage sink in. Trump had turned a simple press conference into a public execution, and Starmer was the target strapped to the chair. The former president's assault on Starmer's character went beyond typical political criticism. He questioned the Labour leader's intelligence, his loyalty to Britain, and his fundamental fitness for leadership. "Look at his record," Trump demanded, gesturing emphatically at the cameras. "Crime is skyrocketing under his watch in Labour areas. Immigration is out of control. He can't even manage his own party, let alone an entire country. How can anyone trust this man with Britain's future?" Each accusation landed like a sledgehammer blow, designed to shatter Starmer's carefully constructed image as a competent alternative to conservative leadership. The international implications of Trump's outburst became clear within minutes. This wasn't just an American politician criticizing a British one. This was a former US president with massive global influence essentially declaring that Britain's potential future leader was unfit for office. The special relationship between the UK and America, built over decades of cooperation and mutual respect, suddenly looked fragile and uncertain. Diplomatic observers watched in horror as Trump single-handedly destabilized transatlantic relations with a few choice words delivered in his trademark brutal style. As Trump's verbal assault continued, the cameras captured every reaction in the room. Some journalists looked shocked, others excited by the explosive nature of the story unfolding before them. Foreign correspondents frantically messaged their editors, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. The global media machine was already spinning into overdrive, ready to dissect and analyze every syllable of Trump's unprecedented attack on Britain's opposition leader. The most brutal part of Trump's demolition came when he shifted from general criticism to specific accusations that cut straight to the heart of Starmer's political credibility. Trump's voice grew colder, more calculated, as he delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire confrontation. "Starmer thinks he can fool the British people, but I see right through him," Trump declared, pointing directly at the camera. "This man is working with EU bureaucrats behind closed doors, planning to reverse Brexit the moment he gets power. He's a traitor to the will of the British voters." The word traitor hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Political analysts would later describe this moment as the precise instant when Trump crossed from harsh criticism into character assassination. The former president's attack strategy was methodical and devastating. He didn't just throw random insults. He systematically targeted every aspect of Starmer's political identity. Trump hammered Starmer's stance on immigration, calling his policies a disaster waiting to happen. He mocked Starmer's legal background, suggesting that career lawyers make terrible leaders because they're too focused on technicalities to understand real problems. Most damaging of all, Trump questioned Starmer's loyalty to Britain itself, painting him as someone more interested in pleasing foreign powers than serving his own people. What made this assault so effective wasn't just Trump's words. It was his complete mastery of the media moment. Every gesture was calculated for maximum impact. When he shook his head in disgust while talking about Starmer's policies, the cameras captured it perfectly. When he raised his voice in mock disbelief at Starmer's statements, the audio levels spiked just enough to create emphasis without distortion. Trump knew exactly how this footage would play on social media, in news clips, and in political advertisements. He was weaponizing his media expertise against a target who had no way to fight back in real time. The international dimension of Trump's attack made it even more devastating for Starmer. This wasn't just domestic political criticism. This was a former US president essentially telling the world that Britain's potential future leader was untrustworthy and dangerous. Trump painted Starmer as someone who would weaken the special relationship between America and Britain, someone who couldn't be counted on as an ally in times of crisis. The implications were staggering. How could Starmer credibly claim to be ready for international leadership when one of the most powerful figures in global politics had just publicly declared him unfit for office? The timing of Trump's attack couldn't have been worse for Labour. The party was already struggling with internal divisions and public skepticism about Starmer's leadership style. Trump's brutal assessment amplified every existing doubt and created new ones. Within hours, conservative politicians were using Trump's words as ammunition, arguing that even America's former president could see what Labor supporters refused to acknowledge, that Starmer was simply not prime minister material. The attack gave political legitimacy to criticisms that had previously been dismissed as partisan nonsense. The aftermath of Trump's live television destruction of Keir Starmer unleashed a political tsunami that crashed through Westminster with devastating force. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, Labor headquarters transformed into a war room filled with panicked advisors desperately trying to contain the damage. Phone calls flooded in from MPs demanding immediate action. Text messages buzzed constantly as party officials scrambled to coordinate a response strategy. But the silence from Starmer's office spoke volumes. Nobody knew how to fight back against such a brutal and public humiliation. The media explosion was unlike anything British politics had seen in years. Every major news outlet dropped their planned coverage to focus entirely on Trump's savage takedown. Sky News ran the footage on repeat, analyzing every facial expression and vocal inflection. BBC political correspondents worked overtime, bringing in expert after expert to dissect the implications. The tabloids went into overdrive, with headlines screaming about Starmer's humiliation and Labour's crisis. Social media platforms became battlegrounds where supporters and critics clashed over the meaning and significance of Trump's words. What made the situation even worse for Labour was how quickly their political opponents pounced on the opportunity. Nigel Farage appeared on every available television program, declaring that Trump had exposed Starmer as a fraud who couldn't be trusted with Britain's future. Reform UK leaders used the moment to position themselves as the true defenders of Brexit and British sovereignty. Even Conservative MPs who usually avoided controversial Trump statements found themselves quietly agreeing with his assessment. The attack had created a permission structure for criticizing Starmer that hadn't existed before. Behind closed doors, Labour MPs were in full revolt mode. Senior party figures reportedly held emergency meetings to discuss whether Starmer could survive such a devastating blow to his credibility. Whispered conversations in Westminster corridors focused on potential leadership challenges and alternative candidates. The very foundation of Starmer's leadership, his image as a competent, electable alternative to conservative chaos, had been shattered in front of a global audience. Party donors began expressing concerns about backing a leader who had been so publicly humiliated by one of the world's most influential political figures. The international diplomatic fallout was equally severe and immediate. Foreign ministers across Europe watched the footage with growing concern about the stability of Britain's political leadership. American diplomats found themselves fielding awkward questions about whether Trump's views reflected broader American sentiment toward potential Labour governance. The special relationship between Britain and America, already strained by years of political turbulence, faced another serious test as officials tried to minimize the damage from Trump's unprecedented intervention in British domestic politics. Most damaging of all was the way Trump's attack resonated with ordinary British voters who were already skeptical about Starmer's leadership abilities. Focus groups conducted in the days following the broadcast revealed that Trump's words had struck a nerve with undecided voters who saw the lack of immediate pushback as evidence of weakness. The perception that Starmer couldn't stand up to foreign criticism raised serious questions about his ability to defend British interests on the world stage. Political strategists recognized that Trump had successfully planted seeds of doubt that would be incredibly difficult to overcome before the next election. The long-term consequences of Trump's devastating live television assault on Keir Starmer continue to ripple through British politics like aftershocks from a massive earthquake. Polling data released weeks after the incident showed a dramatic shift in public perception that left Labour strategists stunned and terrified. Starmer's personal approval ratings plummeted to their lowest point since becoming party leader, with focus groups repeatedly citing Trump's criticisms as reasons for their growing skepticism. The attack had accomplished something that years of conservative opposition research had failed to achieve. It had fundamentally damaged Starmer's credibility in the minds of ordinary voters. The psychological impact on Starmer himself became increasingly apparent as weeks turned into months. Public appearances that once showcased confidence and authority now carried an undertone of defensiveness and uncertainty. His responses to hostile questions grew more cautious, more measured, as if he was constantly aware that any misstep could trigger another viral moment of humiliation. Political body language experts noted changes in his posture, his eye contact, and his vocal patterns that suggested the Trump attack had left lasting scars on his public persona. Within the Labour Party, the Trump incident became a defining moment that exposed deep fractures in party unity and strategy. Internal polling revealed that significant numbers of Labour voters had been influenced by Trump's characterization of Starmer as weak and indecisive. Moderate MPs who had supported Starmer's leadership began privately questioning whether he possessed the strength necessary to defeat the Conservatives in a general election. Left-wing faction leaders, already critical of Starmer's centrist approach, used the Trump humiliation as evidence that his strategy of appealing to middle ground voters was fundamentally flawed. The international ramifications proved equally severe and far-reaching. European leaders watched with growing concern as Trump's intervention demonstrated how easily British politics could be destabilized by foreign influence. Private diplomatic channels buzzed with conversations about the implications of having a potential prime minister who had been so publicly humiliated by a former U.S. president. Trade negotiations stalled as international partners questioned whether Starmer would have the political capital necessary to deliver on any agreements he might sign. Perhaps most troubling for Labour was how Trump's attack had shifted the entire framework of political debate in Britain. Opposition research teams across the political spectrum began studying Trump's approach, learning how to weaponize similar character assassinations against their own targets. The precedent had been set. Brutal personal attacks delivered through mass media could be devastatingly effective in destroying political careers. The rules of engagement had changed forever, and Starmer had become the first casualty of this new era of political warfare. As the dust settles from this political earthquake, one thing remains crystal clear. Trump's live television destruction of Keir Starmer has fundamentally altered the landscape of British politics. The Labour leader, who once seemed destined for Downing Street, now faces an uphill battle against perceptions of weakness that may prove impossible to overcome. The panic mode that gripped Labour in those first chaotic hours has evolved into a grinding campaign of damage control that shows no signs of success. Trump didn't just reject Starmer that day. He may have ended his political future entirely.